Did Thursday Boot Company just ruin the Captain? Well, no, not really, not at all. But they did make some significant changes, what they're calling the new Kingmaker last. So whether you're thinking about getting your first pair of Thursday Captains and you want to know what all the talk about a Kingmaker last is, what that even means, like what is a last, you're thinking about getting your first pair, this is going to tell you everything you need to know about the recent changes. And if you've already had a pair of Thursday Captains, you're thinking about getting another pair, but you're like, oh, they just changed it. I really like the first pair that I got. Well, I'm going to dive into every single change that Thursday has done on the Captain, not only the new Kingmaker last, but all the previous iterations, so you can kind of make sense of the whole story, plus understand whether or not this boot is right for you. So if you've seen the BootSpy channel at all, you know I recommend the Thursday Captain pretty often, especially in my best of boot lists, because I really truly think the Thursday Captain is the best boot under $200. Nobody else does value for money quite like Thursday boots, and truthfully, for me, the Thursday Captain was the very first high quality boot I ever got. And fast forward, 4 or 5 years later, there's the BootSpy YouTube channel that's had over 7 million viewers. There's BootSpy.com that's had over 3 million readers. It started a passion for me, and so I will always love the Thursday Captain. I first got my Thursday Captains maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and over the years a lot has changed about this boot, and probably the biggest change in the history of the Captain has just occurred in September 2023. It is the introduction of the Kingmaker last. So you might have some questions about what is a last, what does that mean, what are the changes? So I'm going to go into all the details of some of the improvements and some things that might be negative with the change of this new shape of this new boot. In order to understand the changes of the Kingmaker last, it's important to know what a last really even is. So let's go over there. I'll show you exactly what it is. If you already know what a last is, then you get extra credit points. If you don't know what a last is, let me explain it. So this right here is a last, and this is basically just a mold that is created, and this makes the basis for the shape of the boot. So when a boot brand is talking about their last and a different style of last, or they have different lasts for different boots, that basically just means this piece of plastic. That's like literally what they're talking about, is this thing right here, and there could be all sorts of different variations. Basically the entire shape of the boot is determined at this stage right here, and there's a whole art to developing a last, and there's all different types of lasts as well. So how high the instep is, that's going to be determined here. How much point there is to the toe, how much height there is to the toe, the width at the ball of the foot, all of these different things are determined in the lasting stage. So a lot of new brands, they'll just use off-the-shelf lasts, but where brands really make themselves unique and separate themselves and have a unique style is creating their own lasts. And so that's something that Thursday's been doing for over 10 years, is actually making this form right here, which is so much harder than you could possibly imagine, because every little detail ends up being basically how much space there is in the boot, and that can affect people's feet differently. For a quick history lesson on the Thursday Captain, there have been 3 different lasts, including the Kingmaker, that the Thursday Captain has been built on. The first iteration was called the True Last, and this was most closely aligned with the Brannick device. So if you had a D width or average width foot, this last was designed specifically to basically fit exactly that size. Now when I hold these two up against each other, you're not going to be able to tell the differences. I'm going to try to get some photos on the screen to really highlight the differences between these different lasts. So back to the True Last, this was the original design for Thursday boots, very slim, very narrow, and when Thursday came out with this type of last, it was pretty revolutionary. At the time that Thursday launched, there was no other like rugged Americana style boot that was slim, modern looking, without being so bulbous. Like the Red Wing Iron Ranger probably still is one of the most popular boots in America, but at the time that was kind of the dominant cap toe boot, and it's definitely more bulbous, a little bit wider, and it definitely has a way different look. So that is why Thursday really blew up, is because they're the first ones to take that rugged Americana style, but then slim it down and make it more modern, more stylish. Of course, with that slimmer shape, that slimmer last, a lot of people were buying the Thursday Captain, and one of the most common complaints that people had was that their pinky toes were getting kind of squished and maybe it was a little bit uncomfortable. People have all sorts of different sizes and shapes of their feet. Again, the most common is a D width or average width, but even somebody like me, I have a D width foot technically, but it's a little bit slightly wider. It's not quite an E wide, but it's somewhere a little bit wider. And so for someone like me, a true average fit might feel a little bit uncomfortable. So in order to respond to that, Thursday created a new last that's called the RT3, or internally, Thursday called it the Nirvana last. Basically, this was a lot wider. It's about 3 millimeters wider. It was 3 millimeters shorter. From a profile view, it didn't look any different. But from the top down, it was seen as a lot stubbier and kind of almost like a totally different boot. And I have to agree with a lot of people who said like this changes what the Captain is and what was great about the Captain. It made it a lot stubbier looking, at least from top down. Again, from the profile view of what most people would see, pretty much looks like the same exact boot, but from a wearer's perspective, definitely a lot stubbier. Now, while a lot of people thought the RT3 was super comfortable and the name Nirvana, like the Nirvana Last, made a lot of sense because people were like, oh, it feels so good on my feet. They wanted to respond to that. They wanted to bring back kind of what made the Captain. And so what they did is they made a new Kingmaker Last that kind of blends a lot of the best elements of the True Last and the RT3. And I think the Kingmaker really threads the needle, helping people who felt the original Captain was too narrow, but keeps the same style, the same look that makes the Captain the Captain. While the Kingmaker is a change to the shape of the Captain, and it's gonna be on the President, this is the President here, it's gonna be on the President as well. Thursday's been making some other improvements to their boots that I think are really worth highlighting, and this kind of all culminates in basically what I like a brand new Captain, kind of a whole re-release, and that's why I want to highlight these things. So the first thing, and I'm never gonna be able to show you on camera, but basically in the back of the heel, they use a piece of rough out leather, which rough out leather, it's like nappy, and basically it helps keep your heel from slipping. And that makes it a little more comfortable. You won't get so many blisters. If it's smooth leather, you know, your foot's gonna rub more, but with a rough out leather, that's gonna basically grip your heel, grip the sock, and it's gonna keep you from getting blisters back there. They've been using that on all their boots from the beginning, but what they've been doing now is instead of stitching the rough out leather on the outside of the lining, which can create a little seam around the heel and can be a little bit bothersome sometimes, they're now doing that on the inside of the lining. And so that's a very minor change. It's impossible to see and it's definitely impossible to show you, but the difference in comfort is actually, it's very surprising. So moving it to the inside, you don't get that seam right there where it's like two pieces of leather on top of each other. Basically, the part that would rub is now completely smooth and it doesn't bother your foot at all, while still having the rough out leather on the heel to grip your heel so you don't get blisters. The second improvement that Thursday has done that I think is actually, again, small but massive. Now, this is a pair of my Thursday Presidents. Zoom in on this and you can see right here that the welt stitching is all completely gone. So the stitching that goes all the way through the sole and attaches the midsole has all been worn out because it's all on a flat surface. And that means when you're walking, you're basically walking on the stitches, so they wear out pretty quickly. And while that hasn't caused any issues with my Thursday Presidents, sometimes people do have that sole separating because at that point, they're no longer stitched together. It's just kind of glued or cemented together at that point. So it's a bit of a structural weak point. With the new Thursday Captains, you can see what's called a welt channel. And basically what they do is they kind of carve out a piece of that rubber outsole, and then that's where the stitch goes. And what that does, it means you're no longer walking on the stitches, or the stitches aren't rubbing against the concrete or whatever surface you're walking on. They're kind of hidden inside that piece of rubber. And so the rubber has to wear out. Eventually those will break out and they'll wear down. That's what any pair of boots would do. But it's gonna take a lot longer on this. That means the whole sole construction, the midsole, the outsole, is a lot sturdier than before. And then a third major difference, and again, you're never gonna see this, but it's what's actually on the inside of the boot. They're using a different type of cork midsole. Now I had an original pair of Captains. This was done, I got them maybe like 2 years after the Kickstarter, so they're still a very new company. I went to a local cobbler here, Wyatt and Dad. They're like a great cobbler. They're well known across the country. And we took apart this pair of boots. They helped me rebuild it, and you can see that video popping up right now. But basically what we found, kind of one of the worst parts of a Thursday boot at that time, was the cork that they used was very thick. It was very like coarsely grained. And so while it felt good, you know, while it breaks in, eventually that cork kind of separated and it could leave almost what felt like pebbles inside of the boot. So that was a problem. Thursday has now updated the cork midsole that they use. It's a lot finer of a grain. So first of all, it's more comfortable when you first put on the pair of boots, and then it breaks in a little bit more gently and it won't break apart. It won't create these like little crumbly crumbles inside of your boot, so that a year down the line, your boot doesn't start feeling uncomfortable. It'll stay comfortable and you'll still have that effect where your foot sinks into the footbed, but it'll be a little more even. So overall, more comfortable right away, and then more comfortable like a year or two down the line. What exactly is different about the Kingmaker Last of the Captain? So there are 3 things that are completely different about the Kingmaker Last that probably makes this Thursday's most comfortable boot, and also their most like broadly appealing boot to the biggest range of people. The number one biggest change is that the ball of the foot is now 1.5 millimeters wider than the True Last. So if you go back to the original Captain, the one that was a little bit too narrow for a lot of people, they made that 1.5 millimeters wider. Now compare that to the RT3, the one that was too bulbous, that was 3 millimeters wider. So basically what they did is they took the middle ground. So they did go on 3 millimeters wider, they went 1.5 millimeters. So it's wider than the original, but it's not as wide as the RT3. The next part is they made the instep, that's this part right here. They made that a little bit taller, probably about by a millimeter. And so that's gonna give you, again, if your feet are a little bit higher, if your arch is a little bit higher, that's gonna give you more room in this boot, overall, much more comfortable. And then the third thing they did is they they've restored the original length of the True Last so that this is just as long, so it still has that very narrow, very slim profile that so many people liked and they really appreciated about the Captain. Well, they did away with the 3mm shorter on the R23. They lengthened it back out 3mm so that you get that classic Thursday Captain look. 3mm wider at the ball of the foot. The instep is a little bit taller. The length of the boot is a little bit longer. My big question when getting the Kingmaker last was, do all of these small improvements, do they add up to making a truly better boot? Or kind of like the RT3 last, do they change what I loved about the Thursday Captain? And should I still continue to recommend this as my favorite boot under $200? After trying the new Kingmaker last on the Thursday Captain, this is in Arizona Adobe leather, for the past 2 weeks, I gotta say, yes, this is definitely an improvement pretty much in every way of the boot. Whereas I think the RT3, that did really rob the Captain of some of the things that I enjoyed so much about the boot. But this version right here truly does improve upon the original Thursday Captain that I fell in love with. While I didn't really have a problem with how the original Captains felt, I actually find this more comfortable. It's one of those things you didn't realize until you try something new and you're like, oh, that is better. So the Kingmaker last, I like that extra width at the ball of your foot. I found the break-in to be easier. The original break-in for the Captain wasn't that hard for me anyway, but it was even easier with the Kingmaker last. And then the improvements that they did with the heel counter, kind of having that rough out patch stitch under the lining. The channel welt, I definitely appreciate that. That was one thing that has bothered me about Thursday boots. Having the channel welt helps a ton in terms of just the overall longevity for the boot. And then the new cork midsole, while I haven't like broken that all the way in yet, because I've only had this for a couple weeks. It's only been out for a couple weeks. Knowing that it's a finer grain, that was also an issue with other Thursday boots with the coarser grain cork midsole. Kind of breaks apart, almost feels like sand under your foot. The new midsole definitely eliminates that, so that's gonna help a ton. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up. It helps out a ton. And if you wanna see how my original pair of Thursday Captains aged over the course of 4 years, then you can check out this video right here. And if you wanna see what they look like at year 5 when I gave them a resole, check out this video right here.